Welcome to the BJJ Lab podcast. I'm your host Pat, and this is episode number 1. Today we're going to talk about how you can prepare for a competition, mostly focusing on the conditioning side of things. What we will do here is we will talk about a 4-week preparation program that you can use to get ready for a competition. But keep in mind that developing strength and a strong aerobic base takes a lot of time. So this is not something that you can do in 4 weeks. What you can do is you can take your current fitness level and improve where you are at. So in 4 weeks you can make quite a bit of progress, but if you want to be at peak performance level, you have to take much more time than just 4 weeks, of course. You can't get in great shape in just a few weeks. BJJ is a very technical sport, so that means we want to do the conditioning on the mat whenever possible. Like, we don't want to take a lot of time out of our BJJ training time just to work on the conditioning. So I'm not a big fan of running, cycling, swimming, and all those things for BJJ. Now, if you're hurt, of course, that's a good way to keep your conditioning up, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing those things. But if you can use BJJ to train your cardio, then you get 2 for 1. You can work on your technique while you train your cardio, so you get a lot more for the time invested. So we will focus mostly on that. So all the training methods that we're going to talk about will be doable just on the mat, so you don't have to do any outside training. Of course, for your off-season work, when you're not getting ready for a competition, for the strength training, that's something you have to do outside of the mats, because there's just not enough resistance in BJJ to get much stronger after you've gotten like some beginner gains if you haven't worked out before. Alright, so we will talk about 3 different training methods, and then I will show you how to put everything together into one coherent 4-week program. The first method that I will talk about is the cardiac output method. This is what most people think about when they hear cardio. So this is like when you go for a long run, that's pretty much the method that you're using. The cardiac output methods increases the amount of blood that the heart can pump per beat. This means it also lowers your resting heart rate because more blood gets transported per beat, so your heart doesn't have to beat as often to transport the same amount of blood. To achieve that, you want your heart rate to be between 130 and 150 BPM for 30 to 90 minutes. What matters here is the total training time. So like 2 30-minute sessions a week is about the same as 1 60-minute session a week. So just track like your total time, and that's how you decide like whether you're increasing or decreasing the volume. The nice thing about this method is that any activity works. So whether you're running, swimming, or of course doing BJJ, it's the same. All that matters is whether the heart rate is in the right range. What you want though is a steady pace. So you cannot just do like high intensity bursts and then rest and so on. It has to be steady. To do that, I recommend either just rolling or really intensive drilling. So not zero resistance drilling, but like realistic drilling, but still like at a pace that you can keep up for 30 to 90 minutes. Same with the sparring, like you have to manage your intensity. So this is not full out sparring, but also not complete flow rolling. You want to keep your heart rate at this 130 to 150 BPM. So if you don't have a heart rate monitor, this is basically the jogging heart rate where you can still talk, but like you're getting tired. If you were going a little bit harder, you would start to get out of breath. But that's still the cruising heart rate. Now this is a method that you usually should use all year round. Like, this is really good to build up your base conditioning. And in the 4-week program, it's mostly here for active recovery. So it gets the blood moving and helps you recover from the more intensive training sessions from the other methods that we'll talk about soon. The next method that I want to talk about is the threshold training method. This method increases the amount of power that the aerobic system is able to produce. It's something that's used across all kinds of endurance sports and has been proven to work very well. So when we talked about the threshold here, we're talking about the lactate threshold. So there's a couple of names for it, but that's pretty much the the heart rate where you're still using your aerobic system to generate the bulk of the energy. Like this is right before you switch into the anaerobic mode, where like it's not really a switch. That's a little bit of a misconception. It's not like you hit the threshold and then one system takes over from the other. They're always, all of them are producing energy at the same time. Basically what happens is the aerobic system is able to keep up with the anaerobic systems, and it keeps recovering them so they can keep producing energy. Once you get above the threshold, then you can't keep up anymore. And that's when you hit this countdown where it's like 2 to 3 minutes after that, like the system runs out of energy and you get this burning feeling and you run out of your cardio. To train your lactate threshold, we want 20 to 40 minutes total of work at the lactate threshold heart rate. You can use shorter rounds as long as the total duration is between 20 and 40 minutes. Now, depending on the sport, like people use different setups for this. For BJJ, this works really well because you can do, for example, a 10-minute round with 5-minute rests, or any other setup that you like to do. Just make sure that you work for 20 to 40 minutes total. You can also do one long round if you want, but personally I find that really hard, so I like the shorter rounds, like 10 minutes works usually pretty well. Your heart rate doesn't have to be exactly at the lactate threshold during the training, so this makes things much, much easier, so you don't have to wear a heart rate monitor. You just want to keep it close, and this is pretty much the pace that you want to keep is just hard sparring, like pretty much a pace that you can keep up for 20 to 40 minutes if you keep the pace roughly constant, so that's where you want to be. So you want to roll at a hard, steady pace, but one that you can keep up. So make sure you don't go too hard in the beginning and then you slow down during the round. You want to keep it as constant as possible. Now, of course, there are ups and downs during a sparring round. That's normal and to be expected, and that's totally fine. You can go above and below the heart rate as long as the average stays there. My favorite way to set up the threshold training session is with a group of 3. So you get 3 athletes of similar skill and weight. Then you set the timer to half the work interval. So if we want to work for 10 minutes, we set a 5-minute round. And every time the timer beeps, one of the athletes rotates out, another one comes in, and you keep going. You have to make sure that you stay active, and you don't want to be stalling, of course. So you want to keep the heart rate in the right area. The nice thing about this group of 3 is that there's always someone coming in fresh. So they smell blood, they kind of push the person that's already tired, and you always have a new person coming in. So that works out really, really well. If you don't have 2 other people who want to run it with you, that's no problem. You can do it in a regular class. You just go for 2 rounds and you sit 1 out. Or you go for 20 to 40 minutes straight, depending on your situation or how you want to do the training. Just don't go hard against training partners if you do this in a regular class. Like, pick them in advance and let them know what you're trying to do, and only go with people who are up for rolling this hard. Because you will go at a pretty decent pace here, not just chilled out sparring, but you will roll pretty hard. So the last method that I want to talk about are the cardiac power intervals. Now this is the highest intensity method that we'll use in this program. And basically what we're trying to do here is we want to increase the strength of the heart and its ability to transport oxygen at high intensities. So what this results in is a higher VO2 max, if you've heard that. Like, it's something that's talked about often in endurance sport groups. Now the problem with this is that your VO2 max is mostly genetic. You can improve it through training, but only by a certain amount. So we only use this method for a really small amount of our training time. It doesn't make sense to use it for much. Often once it's really, really tiring, and you will have to recover from it. And then again, there are benefits, but they're pretty small. So you get a lot more out of the lactate threshold training, because this one is a lot more trainable than the VO2 max. But of course, to get the most out of the program, we will try to train both. What we use for the cardiac power intervals are 3-minute rounds with 3-minute rest. So you always go 3 on, 3 off for 3 to 6 rounds. What we want to do in those 3 minutes is we want to get to the maximum heart rate as fast as possible, and then we want to stay there until the round ends. It takes about a minute usually to get up to the maximum heart rate, and then you have to sustain it for 2 minutes, which is really, really hard. It will be fine for the first 1 or 2 rounds, but after that it will get really, really tough. You really have to push yourself during those rounds. You should not just be tired at the end, but really, really exhausted, especially in the last couple of rounds. You will pretty much just lay on the floor in between, and that's exactly what we want. Because we have to go at such a really high pace, sparring doesn't really work well for this method. Because sparring has ups and downs, and it's really hard to keep up the pace. What we can use instead is some high intensity situational sparring drills. So I recommend you use a different scenario for each round, because we also want to balance a little bit out the upper and lower body. Like each drill focuses a little bit on different body parts. The ones that I've found that work relatively well are passing the open guard. So one person is on the back and the person that's working is trying to pass the guard. So the person on bottom doesn't try to entangle the other person in anything, just keeps recovering, bring the feet in, inverting, and the person on top goes left, right, and keeps chaining passes together. As soon as you get to a pass or the whole thing slows down, you just reset and go again. This is really important here, so it helps if you have a person on the outside who tells you when to reset. Otherwise, the person on the receiving end of the drill can just say stop, reset, and that's how you can keep the pace up. The other scenario is wrestling from a single leg position. So if you're the guy working, you grab the leg of your partner and then you start wrestling, and you keep going until there's a takedown or a break, or again if some kind of stalling occurs, and then you just keep going again and again. This works really well too. Then for some more upper body focused drill, escaping from side control works, but only again if the person on top does the right thing. So if you're working, you're on bottom, and the person on top just wants to stay mobile. So instead of just holding you down, they will just be inside, north, south, knee on belly, changing sides, and you kind of have to chase after them and try to catch something to get out and get space. And again, as soon as you get out, you reset. If you get stuck somewhere, you reset. You can be creative with those scenarios. Just try to find some that require a high energy output and a really fast pace. If it's too slow, then you won't get your heart rate up. So now let's go into the 4-week program that we are going to use to prepare. Before we do that, I want to quickly mention that it doesn't make sense to run too many of those tournament preparations per year, because this is a kind of short-term thing. Now, you will still get benefits, of course, since the focus is mostly aerobic of the program. But if you do a lot of tournament preparation programs, you never really have time to work on your fitness foundation. So let's say if you take MMA fighters who 8 to 12 week camps for every fight, if they fight too often, they have no time to work on their base strength and fitness. That's a reason why they don't fight too often, apart from recovery reasons, of course. So for us, that means you do not want to do too many of those. I would say you could run maybe 4 tournament preparations per year, keep the rest of the time to work on your base fitness. You can also do longer preps for 1 or 2 really important tournaments, like if you do Worlds or ADCC, something like this. But otherwise, if it's a smaller one, the 4-week preparation is more than good enough. That doesn't mean you can only compete 4 times a year, of course. Compete as much as you can, as you want. But you don't always have to prepare like this. Use the preparation for the important tournaments, and the rest of the year just work on your regular fitness and use the tournaments as part of your general training. That's fine. And you still get good experience. And just because you're not preparing doesn't mean you will lose, right? It's just so you're in the best shape for the tournaments that actually matter. especially in smaller tournaments, you will probably also have a lot fewer rounds, so the conditioning is not as important. Because if you do worlds and you do well, you will have a lot of rounds and you need every bit of cardio that you can muster. So the focus of the 4-week block is on the aerobic system, and you should already have a really solid base from general fitness training before you start. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's okay if you don't, so like you'll still get in pretty good shape in 4 weeks, but if you want to get most out of it, you have to stay at a good level. Don't just do a competition and then you just stop training after for a couple weeks, months, and then you start from zero again for the next one. You want to always improve on your base level and never just regress back to zero. Strength gains last relatively long. Like you can run a little bit of strength training beside the 4-week block if you really want to. But if it's a big, like an important tournament, I would not recommend you do a lot because strength gains last relatively long. You can pretty much take 4 weeks off without big strength losses, so you can put all your energy into BJJ and training the aerobic system. Of course, if you think about long term, then keeping up the strength training would be more beneficial because you want to keep increasing, so it really depends on your goals here. Alright, so we start the program, of course, 4 weeks before the competition, and the last week of the block is reserved for tapering. Tapering means we lower the volume and intensity so that your body can recover and peak at the day of the tournament. In the first week, we have 1 cardiac power interval training, 1 to 2 threshold trainings, and 1 to 3 cardiac output method trainings, depending on how often you train, of course. I will put everything in notes as well, so you don't have to take notes or write it down. You can find all this information on fit4bjj.com. fit4bjj.com, and the 4 is in the number 4. In week 2, we have 1 to 2 cardiac power intervals, 2 to 3 threshold trainings, and up to 1 cardiac output method. So this is the highest intensity week. So basically the intensity starts at week 1. You get acclimated to the volume, then you increase it for week 2 towards the beginning of week 3, and then we already start tapering down for the last 10 days. In week 3, we have 1 cardiac power interval, 1 to 3 threshold trainings, and 1 to 2 cardiac output methods. And in week 4, we only have 2 to 3 cardiac output methods trainings. Of course, it doesn't mean you can only do those trainings, especially in the last week. You can still train every day, but you want to really limit the sparring. And if you're not actually using one of the methods, you keep it really light, really technical. But it's fine to train. You just don't want to do an actual cardio session. You should train at least 3 times a week if you want to get something out of the training. And the more the better, of course. Ideally, you do 6 days a week with 1 rest day, if you can do that. Or if you can train multiple times a day, then just use the additional training sessions for light technical work. I would only do 1 hard session a day and keep everything else really light. Otherwise, you just start burning out. The training intensity during these 4 weeks will probably be a lot higher than what you're used to, so make sure you listen to your body. If you don't feel well, it's better to take it easy on that day. Don't burn yourself out. The goal is to be in top tournament shape. Don't just blindly follow the program and then burn yourself out. Your body knows best, and if you train too much, it's okay. Take it easier on the next day and recover so you're ready for the next training session. Always do your technical work, like light drilling, troubleshooting technique, and everything before the conditioning, if you can do so. Because after you'll be really tired and retaining information will be much harder. I'm also not you don't really want to do that stuff when you're super tired, because then if you start drilling after a hard cardio session, you will start being sloppy and you'll just drill the wrong habits. So try to avoid that. So the tapering starts around 8 to 10 days before the tournament. So then we start cutting down and we start using only the cardiac output method and really keep the training volume and intensity down. This is not just for the peaking, but also so you have some time to recover from the injuries, because if from the harder sessions, chances are that you bang some fingers, toes, and small stuff that just happens when you roll hard. So you want to have some time to let those small injuries heal up and be in better shape for the actual competition. So again, as I mentioned before, you can find all this information, like all the training methods and all those things on fitforbjj.com. I've put like sheets together for all those things, so you don't have to take notes or write anything down. You can print them out, bring them to the gym, and you're pretty much ready to go. So hopefully this will help you for your next tournament, and hopefully you'll be in really good shape. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.